It's trash day, I'm putting you out, it's trash day. Putting you out, it's trash day. Putting you out of my mind. It's trash day, I'm putting you out, it's trash day. I'm putting you out, trash day, I'm putting you out of my mind. Now I'm gonna clean up, now I'm gonna clean up, now I'm gonna clean up the house. I'm taking all your garbage, taking all your garbage, taking all your garbage.
It starts with some beer, so you shouldn't have fear. Two garbage guys with facts, but they both still have tact. It's that time at last for the best damn podcast. It's Can Crusher Day!
And welcome back to Can Crusher Spotlight. Mark Martinez alongside the English professor John Padalano. And we are so excited to bring the other half of last week's interview. You know, last week we had B. Brian Blair. This week we have Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. And John, there's not enough that I can say. Thank you very much. You've worked so diligently to get the Killer Bees on here. You're amazing.
Oh, wow. Holy cow, Mark. Do you not know me well enough by now to know that you probably shouldn't feed my ego anymore? No, but seriously, this has been a lot of fun talking to Brian Blair last week. And I'm so looking forward to talking to Jumpin' Jim Brunzell this week.
Yeah, there's so much I want to ask him. Kind of wrap up everything that we talked about with Brian to get his side of the story on some of the things. Right. Talk about, I know he played football. I want to know, playing football here and there. What do you want to ask?
I want to ask about his AWA days, and I'm curious to find out how hard it was for Jumpin' Jim Brunzell to give Vern Gagne his notice that he was leaving and going to the WWF because, Jumpin' Jim was good friends with Gagne's, so that had to be pretty tough to give his notice and go work for the competition.
Yeah, I would imagine it would be. We'll dive into the interview right after, we hear from Al Snow and Collar and Elbow, our favorite clothing brand.
Wrestling. A love and a passion we all share. I've started a wrestling brand. The wrestling brand. A brand founded on the aspects of wrestling. Two entities working together to create a product that connect emotionally for people everywhere. Collar and Elbow is the brand. Passion and love for wrestling is the drive. I am Al Snow, and this is Collar and Elbow, the wrestling brand.
Welcome back to Can Crushers. Mark is your host. I am John, the English professor. We have with us today another half of one of the greatest tag teams of all time, really. Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. Thank you so much for joining us today on Can Crushers, Mr. Brunzell.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry I missed last week. I have a commitment to the University of Minnesota during the football season, and I just couldn't do it, but I'm sure Brian did a great job.
He did an awesome job. This actually worked out beautifully. So everyone being predisposed, everyone having other commitments, it all worked out in the end. Thanks again for being with us. Can we start way back before the days of wrestling?
Fine.
All right. Like a lot of other wrestlers, like Brian Blair, like Mr. Wonderful, whom he discussed, you maybe had intentions of being a football player. Is that right? You had a tryout for the Redskins?
Yes, I played at the University of Minnesota. I was a 2-year letter winner, and I played wide receiver. And actually, after my senior year, I played 1 year of semi-pro football in Wisconsin and got an invitation to a Washington Redskin tryout, which was a 3-day deal down at Georgetown University. And George Allen was the coach, and I think Boyd Dollar and Bobby Mitchell were my coaches. And basically what it was just really fundamentals, running, balance, shuttle drills, catching the ball, etc. And then they, the next day they had a little more progression, and then they said, hey, we'll send you an invite if we intend on inviting you to the camp. So I think there was 2 people that got invited back, and one fellow was a punt returner. His name was Herb Mulkey, and that year, 1972, the Redskins won the Super Bowl, and I think he was all pro. So he actually came from a walk-on tryout, free agent tryout, to becoming all pro. And I think he played a couple, 2-3 years. And I remember when we had our 40-yard dash time, he had the fastest time of anybody, and we ran in mud. Honest to God, it was a really muddy field. It had rained a couple days, and it had drizzled in the morning, and it was just a slow field. So, there was and they had me at a sort of a tight end position. I was, 220 and 6'1", and I had run a 4.6 in college, and then I ran a 4.9 this day, and there was guys, running 5 and 5'1" and 5'2". So I thought I was doing pretty good, and then all of a sudden this Herb Mulkey ran a 4.6, which was incredible for how muddy it was. So, I got back and came back, and I decided to go to school and get my degree. And then Greg had called me and said, Greg Gagne, who was a walk-on with me at the university, he was a quarterback, and we became good friends. And he had transferred to the University of Wyoming because he wasn't going to play quarterback. Murray Warmath, our legendary coach at Minnesota, he liked to have quarterbacks be able to run the ball on an option, and Greg was about 170 pounds. And he was a good passer, but he just didn't fit into the scheme. So he went to Wyoming, and consequently afterwards, Vern had been to the Olympics and saw Ken Patera, who was an Olympic weightlifter, and had more or less enticed him into the camp. And then there was Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik, who was an amateur wrestling coach with the University of Minnesota, and Bob Bruggers, who was an ex-football player at Minnesota and San Diego Chargers, and Ric Flair, who was a schoolboy private heavyweight wrestling champ in high school, and myself and Greg. So I thought, well, I'll give it a shot, and lo and behold, things happen so quick. And this was in the fall of 72. And I'm sure people have heard about Vern's camp. It was 6 days a week, and it was 4 to 5 hours a day. And we started out with calisthenics and running, and then actually Vern wasn't there hardly at all. Billy Robinson actually coached us, and he beat the hell out of all of us with all the submission holds and everything. And we were doing, I tell people this, we were doing 10 sets of 100 free squats before every practice. So,
holy cow!
And honest to God, I had done weightlifting and squats and everything, but my legs became so strong, and the biggest my legs were ever were from doing this doggone camp. So, I hate to keep going on like this, but this was the sequence that happened, and I can remember my first match was December 7th, and it was in Moorhead, Minnesota, and I had wrestled a fellow who had started a couple of years earlier through Vern, and his name was Dennis Stamp. And we had a 15-minute draw. And I came back to the locker room, and, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I was mad because I thought, I just, I wanted so much, I expected so much more out of me, and I kicked this doggone garbage can, and Dusty Rhodes was the main event last night. And he looked down at me and he said, Jimmy, he said, don't worry about this. He says, you're going to have a lot of stinkeroos. So just knock it up. Just forget about it. And so I sort of relaxed after that. And then little did I know that was going to be the start of a 28-year career.
When Greg Gagne, your teammate in Minnesota, approached you, said, hey, my dad runs an organization, runs a school, whatever. What exactly did he say to you? How did he approach you? Did he tell you, listen, we're not really trying to kill each other in there? How does that conversation go?
Well, I had been invited over the Gagne house through my college career. Like I said, Greg and I were good friends, and Vern and I became, pretty good friends. And, he was a legend at the University of Minnesota. And he was, a 4-time Big Ten champion, heavyweight wrestling champion, and national champion, and was on the Olympic team. And he was a pretty damn good football player, too. So I had sort of become friends with him, and he knew that I was a pretty fair athlete and that I, was a high jumper in high school and college and played football and was a good friend of Greg's. So he... more or less, Greg just said, hey, my dad's having this camp. He thinks you could fit in here. And there was never any talk of Greg and I being a tag team then at all. It was just, there was 5 of us and wanted to see how all of us would do. So, I thought, well, I what was I going to do? I was going to get a degree at the University of Minnesota and probably work for a school system or a suburb as far as the recreation department manager. And I thought, well, I still would like to do something athletic, and decided to, go to this camp. It was a hard camp too. I mean, they didn't talk anything about pro wrestling. They talked, it was conditioning. It was amateur wrestling. It was submission holds. It was nothing about timing, ring psychology, nothing. We were left way, and Vern was probably the strictest out of all promoters. And at that time, you had Watts and you had Graham and you had all these people all over the country that were, breaking in people and having some really good talent. And, they just don't say, well, okay, here's wrestling. Here's what we're going to do. We go into the ring, everything is predetermined, the finish, and you guys, you give your body to your opponent, and your opponent gives his body to you. So, be careful, because if you hurt each other, you're not going to make any money because you're not going to wrestle. So they didn't lay that on us until about, so this was September, October, November. I'd say the second week of December. They sort of broke that idea to us,
Wow.
And, yeah. So, everybody was wondering what the hell is going on here, because everybody thought they were pretty smart. But Vern didn't, let on. And then, of course, Billy Robinson beat the crap out of all of us, So he enjoyed it, too. So that was the camp. And then, he brought in Joe Scarpello, who was a great amateur wrestler and wrestled out of Omaha, and he sort of broke us in the middle part of December on talking and describing the work of, in the ring as a professional wrestler. So that was it, and away we went.
You mentioned some of your classmates, pretty prominent classmates, Ric Flair, Ken Patera, Iron Sheik. Can we dive into a couple of them and, go behind the scenes of them just getting trained, what you saw, how you guys compared to each other?
Well, when you look back at that group, I mean, holy smokes, other than Bob Bruggers, who, was in that plane crash in North Carolina and hurt his back and never wrestled again. Cosro, the Nature Boy, Ken Patera, myself, and Greg. I mean, we were very successful in the professional ranks for, a couple decades. And Flair, being the nature boy, was incredible. Kenny Patera, I think was outstanding. He was a great athlete. He was sort of his own worst enemy in terms of dealing with promoters. But, that's part of the scene that, you don't know too much about. And I was so fortunate to begin in Minnesota, and then I did that quick stint. I was down in Kansas City in the NWA for about a year with Bob Geigel and Tad O'Connor and Bulldog Bob Brown and Roger Kirby and Alfred Lord Hayes. But then I'd see the Funks come in, and then I'd see Jack Briscoe. So they were extremely skilled. And I learned from all those guys, so it was a great learning experience for me. And, we wrestled, 7 days a week in Kansas City, and then we wrestled twice, maybe 3 times a night. You come out as an opener, then a tag team, and then there might have been a King of the Ring or a Battle Royal, just to try to draw more people. But, I was fortunate that I got in, and I wound up, they put me together with Mike George down there from St. Joe, and that was my first success as a, tag team guy. And then finally they decided, it was time for me to come back to the AWA. And right before that, though, they sent me to Japan in '74. So I went to Japan. I didn't know anybody on the tour, and holy smokes, I mean, it was a real awakening. And then I came back to the AWA, and they didn't start Greg and I off immediately, but I think Vern had the idea that he was going to put us together. And, I was there 5 years, and we had, we had such great talent to work with, honest to God. I mean, I was spoiled. I had wrestled in a number of territories. And by far, Minnesota was the best, because not only did you have some of the greatest talent out of, 10, 12 guys, but Vern realized that during the summer, people were cooped up here in the winter, and they didn't want to go inside. So we only worked like 14 times a month during the doggone summer, and that is contrary to just about every other wrestling promotion in the country.
Right. Yeah, because everybody else is running all over the place, and you guys are working only 14 times. AWA, Jim, I'm not saying this just because you're on right now. AWA was one of my all-time favorites. Getting home from school, throwing it on ESPN, watching it from there. It was just the classic wrestling that I still enjoy today. So I know John's got something to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quick question about Kansas City. You mentioned you started there. Was that Vern's call to kind of send you there and get a little bit of work? Because I was curious why he would train you and then send you somewhere else.
Well, there's only so many spots in Minneapolis, and Greg at that time was refereeing in the AWA. He started, I think, a week or two after me, I think in the first part of January 1973. And, they brought in different guys, Johnny Heidman and a fellow by the name of Tinker Todd, who worked with us, and they were in the back end of their careers, and they helped us in the ring in terms of, being able to follow a heel in the ring and getting your timing down and progressing in your ring psychology. So I think, I was very fortunate to go down to Kansas City because, again, I saw some talent, like the Briscoe brothers and the Funk brothers, who I thought were just, they compared, they were right with Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens and Wahoo McDaniel and, Vern and Billy Robinson and, Mad Dog Vachon and Baron von Raschke and, Buddy. I mean, we had guys here that were just, so good in the ring and so good on the mic that, I got spoiled.
Right.
Yeah.
You had a stint for Jim Crockett too. Is that right? Who'd you wrestle there?
Yeah. Well, I was sort of getting a little upset in the AWA because, I only went as far as the high flyers, and I had some great matches with Nick Bockwinkel around the whole territory, and we did I think 2 or 3 Broadways, 60-minute draws, and they were just outstanding matches. I consider Nick one of the top 3 wrestler workers who I had the opportunity to wrestle in the world, in the profession. He was incredible. I mean, he was 6'2.5", 245, and he could wrestle, and he was a great heel. I mean, he could teach all these. Well, there's no heels now. There's no baby faces. Everybody's a heel now.
Right, you're exactly right.
Yeah, so everybody is tougher than hell, and they can beat, they can beat the crap out of everybody. There's very little humility, and that's fine. That's what Vince wants, but we'll get into that later. But I was so, and then Bobby Heenan, who I consider, the greatest all-around talent ever in my era, without a doubt. I mean, he was the greatest manager by far.
Agreed.
People talk about these managers, and I said, geez, they couldn't compare. When Bobby wound up being in the WWF or WWE, he'd go out 4 times.
Right.
He had guys, and he was so brilliant at the microphone. That just nobody could compare with him, and his timing and psychology in the ring was second to none. And then when he was here, he had Bockwinkel, and he had Bockwinkel and Stevens, and he was just incredible.
Yeah, I agree. Nick Bockwinkel, I'm not sure gets enough credit. He was brilliant in the ring, brilliant on the microphone. On that note, you mentioned Ray the Crippler, Bobby Duncan, Ken Patera. Did Nick Bockwinkel need Bobby Heenan? As good as Nick was on the microphone, did he need a manager, do you think?
I think he did for the matches. Because Bobby's brilliance in the ring, I mean, his psychology in the ring, just the little things he did added. And he complimented Nick. I mean, Nick was, like you said, he was a great interview. I mean, he was, he was second to none, but the 2 of those guys were incredible. And then when Nick and Ray were a tag team, they were sensational. Bobby just added, frosting to the cake every place he went. And, when he went to the WWE, and this was the really funny thing about the transitioning from 26 territories down to 1 territory, and then what we see now is that before everything was clear. I mean, you'd go up there, and Bobby Heenan only had 8th grade education, and consequently, towards the end at the WWE, they had 5 and 10 pages of interviews and his script that he had to memorize.
Wow.
He says, I can't do this. He says, I can't do this. He says, Jesus. And so I think slowly but surely, they sort of pulled Bobby out of more or less doing the interviews for his friends, or the guys that he was representing, and he was more of a presence in the ring, and, nothing was, it was just 1 or 2 lines and, something like that. But that was, it just curtailed his genius to the point where, and now what you see is everything. I mean, everything is timed down to the second for their interviews, their match time. It's just incredible. I mean, and consequently, me and sure, when I watch, and I don't watch much of the wrestling now because I just, it's all the same. All the characters are almost the same, and the format of what the matches are during the different matches, they're they're the same. A guy goes out to the ring, another guy goes out to the ring, he grabs the mic, the other guy grabs the mic, they start to wrestle, and then another guy runs out there, and then another guy runs out there, and then you think, holy Jesus,
We were saying that right before you called in to Can Crusher Studio. We were legit saying that because we went back and we watched AEW from this week, and then we watched NXT a little bit, getting ready for our weekly show, and we were saying the same thing, Jim, that, there's a big move, a finisher that starts the match, they rest, then another big move, and then they rest, and it's the same nothingness. It's too spotty to be called wrestling, right?
Right. Well, and granted, these guys are incredible athletes. I mean, they do stuff in the ring now that we couldn't do, because if you did do that and you landed wrong, you'd be out for 2 weeks because you'd have a sprained ankle or a tweaked knee. And you watch the girls now. The ladies are just incredible. Not only are they unbelievably beautiful, but they have such athletic talent. It's unbelievable. But I think Vince trains every one of them personally.
You really?
I'm just kidding.
Oh, okay. I was going to say.
Surprised me.
Right. Well, I knew where you were going, but I'm like, wow.
Okay.
Another thing that we always say.
There was a silence there.
I was befuddled for a minute. We're saying the women are actually saving professional wrestling on the WWE landscape a lot. We say that a lot during our show. I know you said you don't watch a lot, but are you more intrigued to watch the women, not just because of their beauty, though, Jim, but are you more intrigued to watch them for their matches because they're doing something new, or it's just better?
Well, it's just, I was interested in because of Rick's daughter, Charlotte. And, I remember her, when she was just 2 or 3 years old. And, to see how she's blossomed into a beautiful woman. But, this is just my own feeling. I would never recommend professional wrestling for a woman. I just don't understand it, other than right now they're making great money, and if they can deal with the business and deal with the road and save their money, I mean, more power to them. But I just and I have no idea what the schedule is, but I'm sure Brian mentioned this last week. When we started in '85 and they put us together, we were on the road for 3.5 years, and we averaged 27 days a month.
Wow.
And people don't realize that, but I mean, we went 50-some days in a row without a day off. I broke my hand in Rockford, Illinois. Yeah, Greg Valentine blocked I had a double wrist lock on him, and I went to take him over, and he blocked my hand, and the pressure on my two hands snapped the middle of my bone in the middle of my hand.
Oh, my
and
God.
You could hear it in the ring. It snapped, and I thought, oh, shit, I broke my hand. So I believe it or not, I only missed one day. I went home the next day. They let it, the swelling go down, and they put a cast on. So I met Brian, I think a day later, and I think the Killer Bees won more matches with me clotheslining people with this cast on than we did with a dropkick or a
So when you show up in the WWF, how tough is it to give your notice? There's a picture of from about 1983 in a magazine spread of the AWA roster, and you fast forward 2 or 3 years, and about half of you guys are working for Vince McMahon. Your friendship with Vern and Greg, how hard was it to give them notice that you were leaving?
It was horrible, but here's what had happened. Vince had taken all the talent from all the 26 different territories. He'd sucked all the talent. At this time, in 1982, I opened up Jumpin' Jim Brunzell's gym. It was a co-ed gym. It was 5,000 square feet. I had, $50,000-$60,000 worth of equipment. I had a wonderful, probably the best steam bath in the cities, and a hot tub, and I had suntanning and I had daycare. And what was happening was and I needed money, from my wrestling income to add to, just the cost of running this business. And I thought, well, people ask me when I was 18, what do you want to do when what do you want to do when you get older, or what do you want to have as a business? I said, I want to have my own gym. So I had my own gym, but geez, it just about killed us financially. So what had happened was I told Vern, I didn't tell him, I asked him, I said, Vern, I realize times are tough here, but I need a personal guarantee from you, a contract, so I'll be Greg's partner, into whatever amount of time you want, but I need $95,000 a year. That's what I told him I needed. And he, you know what he told me? He said, you're not worth it.
Wow.
That's exactly what he said. And it just crushed me. So the next day I called Hulk and I said, I'm ready to come in. And I left Minneapolis, didn't look back at all, just said, hey, I mean, if I was 30 years old, I think, or whatever it was, 35 years old. I figured, well, I've got X amount of time left in me, and if I want to be a pro wrestler, I got to be where the money is.
Right.
And it just, all those other territories, I mean, it was funny because Jack Lanza worked in the office for Vern, and he called me and he says, oh, Jim, he says, you're making a big mistake. You can't leave Greg. The AWA needs you. And I said, Jack, it has nothing to do with friendship. It's money. And lo and behold, about 6 months later, Jack Lanza was sitting in the office in the WWE working as an agent.
When Vern tells you, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, it's funny because Jack, was, railing on me for leaving, and then
right.
all of a sudden he's got his nose pressed so far on Vince's backside that he didn't need any black hair dye. He had brown.
Ironic, don't you think? When Vern tells you you're not worth $95,000, I know you don't know everybody's business, but Hulk versus Bockwinkel, was huge, a lot of fun to watch. What do you suppose those guys were pulling down, and what were you asking for in regards to what those guys were making?
Oh, I tell you what, they always say they have you on a salary. Nick was probably making, I would say $100,000. And Hulk, here's the thing about Hulk Hogan. He came here, and Johnny Sullivan was his manager, and
Luscious Johnny.
They brought him in as Johnny, the two brothers.
Right, Valiant, Johnny Valiant, Luscious Johnny Valiant.
And he was good too. Johnny Valiant was just incredible, and he came out and all of a sudden they bring Hulk in, and Hulk was a guitar player. He's 6'8", just came off that doggone Rocky III movie or whatever it was. So they bring him in as a heel, and he gets over as a babyface. He was the biggest attraction the AWA had in years. He set unbelievable records. And Vern, his ego was hurt because Vern had always, tailored the AWA to have a athletic, wrestling type, athlete be the champion. All of a sudden you got a muscle-bound guitar player that has a good rap and has got a ton of charisma and is athletic. And all of a sudden he goes and they sell out everywhere. I mean, it was incredible. And, people couldn't understand, why the hell he wouldn't work a deal so he could get the belt from Nick and then come back and, work something, but Vern just wouldn't do it. And finally, they had the big issue between Hulk Hogan and Vern Gagne was they had T-shirts. And Terry had worked out a deal and said, hey, well, you know, here's the deal. If you're going to make all this money off these T-shirts, I want, you know, my share. And Vern had agreed to this. So what finally drove Hulk away was the fact that now the percentage is it might be here or there, but the AWA and Vern had wound up owing Terry about $45,000 in T-shirt money, and he wouldn't give it to him.
Holy cow!
And so Terry says, "Hey, you know." So all of a sudden, you know, Vince, you know, has a golden opportunity there, and Terry was the golden goose, man. I mean, he left Minnesota and never looked back, and I mean, he had a rocket ship on him, and he blew the doors off everybody. I mean, he just was incredible.
Right.
It's funny because I have a 1985, or it's either 84, 85, Sports Illustrated, and it's got a picture of Hulk Hogan on the front, and it says, America's Top Banana. Inside, Hulk Hogan was reported to be the highest paid athlete at $10 million a year.
Wow.
I remember that Sports Illustrated.
I think it was 85.
It was one of the very first ones that a pro wrestler would ever be on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, I think it was the first one,
Well,
actually.
probably the only one.
Right.
Well,
Right.
yeah, now, yeah.
Right. Yep. When you get to the WWF, are you teaming with Brian right away? Are you in some singles matches first? No.
I had single matches, and you know there was so many guys. I mean, Christ, they had 60 guys.
Right.
And the deal was, they had 60 guys to get them all over on TV. They'd show them on TV, and then they'd run 3 towns a night with 20 guys in each town. So, you know, the numbers, and George Scott, who was the booker, he was the booker who fired me in North Carolina. So I realized, I thought, oh shit, you know, here we go. I got George to deal with, but you know, when I got there, he says, Jim, we'll forget about the past. It's all different. And I said, good. So, you know, I mean, like I said, they worked the daylights out of us. And when you go to the East and New York, and you got Boston, and you got Philly, and you got upstate New York, and you got, you know, you got all these towns you're not familiar with, and the traffic, it was just horrendous. So it was a real awakening, you know, for guys all over. You know, usually guys, you know, they get on the freeway for, you know, drive 200 miles. Well, you drive 200 miles, you'd fly in a plane, get a rent-a-car, drive 50, 60 miles, go back to the airport, and get in the hotel, fly the next day. You know, very seldom were you in the car, you know, 2 or 3 days in a row. It was flying almost every day.
Wow.
And that was really hard to get used to. And we were flying all over the place. I remember every 2 weeks you'd get this envelope, and it had 14 days worth of airplane tickets in it.
Where were some of your favorite places to go? Have it because the food was great there, or anything? What are a couple of your favorite towns? And let's take Minnesota, since you live there, completely out of the realm when you were traveling.
Okay, I liked San Francisco because they had a place called Original Joe's. And my first feel about all these towns, I mean, the arenas were good, the fans were good, but I always looked for the restaurant. And I mean, we had a place in East Rutherford, and Paul Orndorff found this place. It was an Italian place. And we go there about 2:30 in the afternoon and have a big pasta meal. I can't think of the name of it, but it was not too far from the stadium there. And then in Boston, you know, they they had so many great restaurants, and upstate New York, Syracuse, they had this doggone little hole in the wall Italian place. Can't think of the name of it either, but it was great. So and this went on, and I'll tell you what too. When we used to go to Phoenix, all the boys just get off the plane. They go right to Whataburger, because at that time nobody, we didn't have Whataburgers up in the Midwest, and they didn't have them out in the East, but they had them down in Texas and Arizona, and they were incredible. So guys would, load up on these hamburgers, and they were, like half-pound hamburgers, and they were delicious. So, that was a stop. But I as far as the crowds, Madison Square Garden, you go there and cry. When you have, I don't know how many, 10 million people or 12 million people to draw from, and you're going to get 20,000. I remember, some of them that boo, the baby faces and applaud the heels, but that's just the way the East Coast was. I mean, Boston was the same way, and it just was part of the territory. And I remember Paul Orndorff got hit with a pint bottle in Boston and cut his head open, and those crowds were vicious, and going back years before. Bob Windham, Blackjack Mulligan, was wrestling in Boston in the Garden, and he was wrestling Pedro Morales. And, they have a huge constituency of Hispanic there. And, Mulligan was beating the crap out of Pedro, and a guy jumped in the ring and sliced Jack Mulligan 180 stitches with a carpet knife.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Yeah, he almost bled to death. And the crowd applauded this guy.
Holy cow!
So, it was way different of a crowd. And I think it had to do with a lot of the wrestling fans in the East Coast. Are they're hard workers during the day. I don't. There. Towards the middle of our run, you got a lot of doctors and lawyers because their kids were interested in in the WWE, and Vince's TV had really, underlined the fact that we got to go for the kids with our trinkets and all the lunch boxes and the T-shirts and the action figures, and then they'll tell their parents, let's go to the wrestling matches. And consequently, he grew a fan base there that was already there, but it increased because of the talent.
Last week, Brian taught us an interesting fact. He said that the money is in the hunt, but then he also said at some point, if you don't give the fans the payoff, they're going to give up on you. And I think that was true with Hulk Hogan and Nick Bockwinkel, and it was true, unfortunately, with the Killer Bees and the Hart Foundation. He says you guys were promised a championship 3 different times, once by Vince and twice by, I don't remember the name, another promoter. What was the story there, and why did we never see the Killer Bees as world champions in the WWE?
Well, to make a long story really short is the fact that Vince and I never got along, and I told Brian this later. I had Greg had signed a contract with this LJN or whatever it was, and they made these high flyer dolls. So I had no knowledge of this. He signed my name on the contract. Greg did. So I get to WWE and I get called to the office, and Vince says, "Hey, you're here with us. Why would you sign a contract with LJN for these high flyer dolls?" And I said, "I never did." I said, So I wound up winding up suing Vern. And what had happened was we got paid up front, and they kept my money. I was supposed to get $12,500 for this initial payment on these high flyer dolls. So what had happened was Vince said, "You're under contract with me," so he took the money. he had LJN give him a check, and I said, "Oh, no." I said, that was for the high flyers. This was something that happened, even though I didn't, agree to it, but it was in my name. So I wound up suing Vince before everything got going, and I got the money back from him. So right away, I was a little thorn in his side. And, I think he took me because he realized that, I was part of the AWA and part, been a, tag team partner of Greg for 10 years. And I was a friend of Hulk Hogan. So, and I could work and, I could do okay. But he and I never really saw eye to eye. And I realized right off the bat when I met him that I wasn't going to like him. So, I could see him for what he was, and he didn't like either of us, to be honest with you. And I know Brian, he thought that he and Vince had a great relationship. Well, that's not true. I mean, Vince could, he was a snake charmer, but, I had questioned some payoffs and stuff like that. And, he didn't like that. He thought I was a locker room lawyer. And I just, cared about us as, the product because, we were gone so much, and I just, you don't get anything. I mean, they make you an independent contractor, so you have to pay your own taxes, and I have no idea what they do now, but we weren't employees, so, and then you never knew what you were going to make. I mean, you didn't sign a contract for $150,000. You just signed a contract that said that you were going to work for Vince. And whatever you got, nobody knew how much you were going to make. I remember when Brian and I first started, we were making close to $5,000 a week, but we were wrestling 7 days a week. And I thought, holy God, $5,000 a week, man, this is incredible. And even though I was gone a lot, I thought, this will be great. Then all of a sudden, after about a month, it dropped down to about $3,000, and then it was in the 2,200, 2,300, but we were still working 7 days a week. So this is what Vince did.
Wow.
He brought guys in, depending upon, where they were, and Vince's whole deal was, I'll make the stars my stars. So consequently, you had guys other than Hulk, but you had guys, like Randy Savage. Randy Savage was a great worker, good on the microphone, but he wasn't a huge star until he got to the WWE. He was a regional star in, Tennessee or wherever else he was, and consequently, Honky Tonk Man, Wayne Ferris. I never heard of him until he got to, WWE. And
Right.
You had guys, that like Jim Heltwig, the Ultimate Warrior. I mean, nice guy, chiropractor, couldn't work a lick, and made no sense on his interviews, but he had incredible
Right.
And it was the truth. And this guy was making, $2 and $3 million a year.
Right.
And Vince just loved him, and I'll never forget the time we were in, I think it was Sioux City, South Dakota, or Sioux, whatever it was. It was in South Dakota. And the main event was the Ultimate Warrior and Andre. They get in the ring, blah, 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 blah. 40 seconds later, Ultimate Warrior hits Andre with 3 or 4 clotheslines and beats him in the middle of the ring. And I thought, my God, what in the world is it? And the people just booed like a son of a gun. And I don't think they ever ran that town again.
Wow.
Because, and this was Vince's thinking. He figured that if he pounded it down the people, that this guy was, the best things in sliced bread, that they would drop. But if you watch Heavyweight Ultimate Warriors matches, they were all the same, and
Right.
they lasted maybe 1 to 2 to 3 minutes, and he'd come out of the ring and he was out of breath,
Right.
from hitting the rope 20 times.
Depending on the opponent, Rick Rude, Macho Man, those guys brought some good things out of the Ultimate Warrior. But besides that, you're absolutely right, Jim.
Yeah. Well, and Rick Rude never was a huge star, but he had a great body, and they worked him well, and he was sort of right in the middle, and did a good job. And Randy Savage, he did a great job. He really got over well, and but needless to say, he was Vince's creation.
Right.
And then there was a lot of guys, Bob Orton Jr., who I considered was one of the best all-around talents of my guys, the guys that I started with. He was by far the best, and Dickie Slater, who was good, and Vince made him the rebel, and oh, Jesus.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I forgot about that. Oh, my God.
It was a nightmare.
It was horrible.
But Vince, it was his game, and either had to play ball, and otherwise, where are you going to go?
Right. Well, I think the guys today owe you at least a little bit of a debt of gratitude for having the guts to stand up for yourself and say, look, this is what I think I'm worth, and I'm going to fight for it. So kudos to you for that.
Well, he fired me 3 times and brought me back and created a situation where I had to do jobs on TV for guys. And I hated doing that because I thought he really took advantage of me. He didn't need to do that, but he did just to show me that he had the power. I can do whatever I want. And I remember one time I had a match with Randy Savage on TV, and it was a pretty damn good match.
It was great, actually. It was great.
I hit Randy right in the mouth with the drop kick, and he comes up, and his mouth was bloody, and I thought, oh, shit, here we go. And we just went through the regular match, and it was, Sherry was there, and we got out of the ring and walked through the apron, and Vince McMahon met us there, and he said, fellas, I want to tell you that was one of the best TV matches I've ever seen. Thank you. And I thought, well, thanks, Vince. He didn't have to say that, but he did. But, there was consequently down the road, I had to work with Ted DiBiase, and Ted DiBiase was a better than average worker, but he was $1 million man. Never, outside of Oklahoma, he was a good worker and good on the microphone, but he wasn't the same caliber as, guys like Ric Flair or Bob Orton Jr. or, Hulk or any of those guys, or even Roddy Piper, and it just, it was how Vince felt about you is where you were going to go up the ladder.
Right. Just to backtrack very quickly, we asked Brian this last week. I'd love your take on this. In Philadelphia, speaking of Hulk Hogan, speaking of the $1 Million Man, they're in a lumberjack match. The Killer Bees are 2 of the lumberjacks, or 2 guys dressed up as the Bees. We never did quite find out who they were. They trip Hulk Hogan. After the match, Hulk drags him in the ring, beats them both up, tries to unmask them, but they've got masks under the masks. What was the story behind that? Was that you guys? Was that somebody doubling as you guys?
That was when I was gone. We were gone. I think they just did that just to crush the Killer Bees because I don't remember it happening. I don't remember anybody telling me about it. I don't remember Brian telling me about it, and he would have known about it right away. But, I thought the whole gimmick with the mask was an incredible idea for babyface, to be a babyface team that would take advantage of a heel move by putting these masks on, and we could have drawn a ton of money, but again, Vince decided not to do it. But, you know, why would you want to make baby faces heels when, you know, baby faces, you know, we probably could have been a heel team, but I don't think we would have amounted to much, you know, because like I said, Vince didn't like us.
Right. Even though you got,
you know,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, even though you guys weren't, you and Vince weren't best buddies, were you interested in working behind the scenes? Is that true? And what do you think you could have brought to the wrestling business at that time?
Well, I thought there was an opportunity, you know, through my experience of being in the ring, to work as an agent. And there was a slight window there, but then I sort of put two and two together, and you know, I realized that, you know, it wasn't going to happen. And they had Steamboat, and they had a couple other guys that, you know, Dean Malenko and Steve Kern, and Tony, what was his last name? Gurria. And they had a number of guys, you know, and I thought, well, I mean, here I you know, spent 20 years in that business. I knew a little bit about it, you know, more than a little, and I could convey, you know, not only ring savvy to the guys, but to make sure that they took care of themselves on the road and didn't, you know, just tell them of, you know, the things on the road that could hurt them, not only hurt them as far as their business, but also hurt them as far as their family. And, you know, I thought, well, maybe there might be an opportunity, but that never happened. And then again, shortly after that, Brian and I found out that, you know, under the contract that we signed, that was supposed to be, I think it was 20% of the gross from outside sales, they wound up paying us 8% of the net. So we had a lawsuit against them and won against and settled out of court. And that's another thing that, you know, didn't like. But, you know, I mean, they were paying pennies on the dollar when, you know, I'm talking about royalties, you know, and
right.
At this time, you know, Hulk was making $50,000. I mean, he was Hulk, but
Sure.
he was making $50,000 a week.
Oh my God!
Holy cow! Wow.
$50,000 a week, and the rest of us. I mean, there was some guys. I remember when they got the, you know, some guys were getting $50,000 and $60,000 a quarter on their doll sales, you know, on their action figure sales.
Right.
And I found it a little hard to believe that when they gave us $10,000, I thought, you got to be kidding me. You know, $10,000 on Killer Bee dolls that, you know, sold worldwide. And so we sued them and found out that, you know, in reality, they owed a number of the talent in between $150,000 and $350,000.
Holy cow! Wow.
And you know, and here's the deal: if we wanted to pursue that and go for that, you know, high-end money, it would have cost us $50,000 a piece, and then the chances of us winning might be 50-50. That's what our lawyer told us, and he said, and it took 3 years. I mean, there was you know, they delayed, and the guy who represents Vince is just a scumbag too. Can't think of his name. Is Jerry something, but he was just despicable. I would like the clotheslineman put the boots to him.
Yeah.
When we did depositions, you know, he treated. We had a lady, Myra Grabard was her name. She was out of Stamford, Connecticut, and he absolutely insulted her for the first 10 minutes, tried to, intimidate her. And I thought, what in the hell are you doing? I mean, he really pissed me off. But, that was Vince.
Wow, that's too bad. That really is. You've heard, we've all heard wrestlers, they leave a territory, they go somewhere else, they win a championship, they sort of have a new lease on their career. Ric Flair talked about it when he left Ted Turner and they put the WWE Championship on him, and he realized how good he was. You and Brian win UWF Tag Team Championship gold. Is that sort of a retribution for you guys? Did that tell you guys, hey, look, we are good enough?
No.
It
was nice, but we knew there was no question that we were a championship caliber and could have been, we could have gone anywhere and been champions. The fact is that, when we went to the UWF or whatever it was, there was a lot of guys there that, had been in the WWF or WWE and were, making a dollar. And it was logical that Brian and I become the champions, which was good. And, but at the same time, the deal with, like I said before, the deal in the WWE doesn't mean much if when they give, championship belts out, it's not necessarily the best of, the talent.
Right.
It just plays into the politics of the promotion. That's what it is. And, like Vince said, I make my own champions. Vince had his idea, everybody should have 20-inch arms and, a 52-inch chest and should holler like hell and shouldn't, should be a little braggadocious and not be any show any signs of humility. And he didn't care if you were All-American in college or high school or what. That was his idea.
Hey, I don't know if this is any consolation for you, but as children, I can tell you Mark and I righted history a couple of times. We had the Killer Bees LJN dolls go over the British Bulldogs, and we also had them go over the Hart Foundation. So you guys are two-time champions in our organization.
As children, that was last week, John.
Yeah, I guess we busted out the figures.
We still collect figures. Do you collect? Do you have any of the figures? I know it might be a touchy subject, but any like the new ones out that they've remade or anything about the Killer Bees?
Yeah, we got a certain amount of those, and I auction them off at fundraisers at church and whatever. I have my book. Matter of fact, I wanted to mention my book, Matlands, I wrote about 3 years ago, and it's sort of a autobiography, and it's true stories from the wrestling world, and it's on line. It's on a company called Blurb, BLURB, and I wrote every word of it, and my wife edited it, and she wrote it all up. I have all my own pictures of my own personal, pictures that I had throughout my career. Great stories in there, stories that are hard to believe, but they're true. And it was fun to do this, and I've done real well with this book, and I bring them to. Matter of fact, it's funny. Brian and I are going to be out in New Jersey in a couple weeks at Freehold, where that's Bruce Springsteen's hometown, and I've been a huge Springsteen fan for 45 years, and have had a great opportunity in knowing Bruce and meeting him and being with him on a number of times after shows, and I do devote a nice chapter about Bruce in my book, and I used to drive the guys crazy, because I'd always play his music whenever we, hit the road in the car. So I remember I wanted to mention Jake Roberts, and Jake was there at the end. To me, Jake Roberts at the end, I would say in the 90s, 91, 92 or whatever, 89, whatever it was. He was incredible in the ring. And he had his own demons, but him and Bobby Orton Jr., I think, were the two best all-around guys, as far as working, of guys my age, not talking about Jack Briscoe or Dory Funk or Terry Funk or Nick, those guys, but in that later on echelon of guys, Jake was incredible. He had great timing. And just everything he did in the ring was great. And like I said, Bobby Orton Jr. was the same. And his kid, Randy, to me, is probably the best the WWE has. And he's got a lot of different style now, but for a big kid, he does a lot. Timing is great in the ring, and I like that Jeff Owens tour, if that's his name. But and occasionally I'll see those guys, very seldom. And then it was funny because Brian and I were in Canada at this Comic-Con, and it wound up Undertaker. Mark came for 3 hours. He got $75,000, and he had flown in from Saudi Arabia. He made $2 million for wrestling over in Saudi Arabia.
Holy cow.
And I wound up flying to him. He lives in Austin, Texas. So I said to him, Mark, and he's been there. He came in, I think, in 90 or 89 or 91 or 92, and I was still there, substituting for guys that got hurt. And he was there, and I says, how in the world have you maintained your rank and, privilege with the WWE with Vince? And he said, I don't know how I did it. I said, do you have a lawyer? And he said, no. He says, I've done all this, through Vince and, and myself. And I thought, holy smokes, here you got a guy like him, and then you got a guy like Brock Lesnar, and they only work 5 times a month, 5 times a year.
Maybe. A year, yeah.
Right.
Or 10, and they're making millions of dollars.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. More power to them.
Right. To your point about Jake the Snake, Cowboy Bob, not just in the ring as far as the athleticism goes, those guys were really good at giving a look, a gesture, just a simple hand gesture or look could get a rise out of a crowd. I think that's harder to do these days, but you mentioned Randy Orton. I think he gets that too. There's something about him. He can give a look. He can give a gesture or something that can get a rise out of a crowd. And it reminds me of his father. It reminds me of Jake the Snake.
Yeah, me too. The chip off the old block.
Yeah.
And I saw Bobby, I think, where the heck? I saw him in Philly. New Jersey. We were in New Jersey at Monroe, and I hadn't seen him for a little bit. And, he came to the AWA, and he was incredible. He was, light years ahead of a lot of guys. And like I say, he was the best out of my group. And I remember they booked him with Billy Robinson, and Billy Robinson ate him up. And I thought was really, really wrong to do. And I think Bob Orton shortly thereafter left and had a horrible taste in his mouth of the AWA because, he was a very special talent.
Right. Hey, I'm an avid comic book collector. I love all things DC. Is it true I hear there's a Killer Bees comic book out there?
There is. And, they take about every 5 years one comes out. They originally had one, and this is done through John down in, I want to say Florida. Can't think of his last. I'm having more trouble with last names now. But they started out with one with Brian, and then they had one last year on me, and now I think they're going to do a Killer Bee, a third one. And it's sort of fun. How many how many people can say that they have a comic book on them, and it's sort of fun, and we bring these to the different signings, and there's always people that eat them up, and it's sort of fun. I give them to matter of fact, I sent the comic book to Bruce. I don't know if he got it or not, but there's a little deal in there about me and my wife standing next to Springsteen, it says. So, but, anytime, you can be out of the business, 30 years and have anything pop up, publicly and monetize that, it's a feather in your cap. And, it's funny because you go places, and I just turned 70 in August, and you'd be surprised how many people still remember, either the Killer Bees or the High Flyers. And it's always a pleasure to see that. And then, I take a lot of pride in that I did something that people, think of as part of their, growing up and watching TV and equating with, happy times and satisfaction of watching something on TV. So, I've had a very blessed career, and, I've had some awkward surgeries now, and, like Brian has had some too. And, it just goes with the territory. If you spend, 20 years bouncing around a ring, you're going to have problems. And nobody I know, although Ric Flair, he's got some heart issues, but, out of all the bumps he's taken, and he said that his hips are fine and his knees are fine, I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, seeing him jucking and jiving sometimes, his knees don't look fine, But, Jim, you've said you worked with, the University of Minnesota, that you have engagements there. You do a lot of charitable events, like with diabetes, Down syndrome. I mean, what else are you doing? Because you're still out there. Like you said, you feel good that everybody recognizes you. It's because you're doing so much charity. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, everybody wants to give back, and like I said, I've been very fortunate. So, there's a lot of different groups that need help, and they need financial aid, and if I can give up some books or make an appearance to add to their help, I'm more than happy to. And I mentioned there's a area in southeast Minneapolis that has a real indigenous Indian population, and there's been a lot of problems in terms of housing and drug abuse and just everything you can think of. And so they've had a couple of wrestling sponsored fundraisers, and they've really done really well. And one reason why is they got 3M to back them up. So
wow.
They paid for the wrestling show, and then you go there and you sell your books, and then you give a portion to the cause, and at the same time people come out and say, hey, I'd like to have a picture with you, and I remember you, and thank you for the memories. So it works both ways. So anything I can do, I'm happy to do, and like I say, there's a lot of causes that need help.
Yeah, you're 100% right on that. And where can everybody find you on social media? I know you're on Facebook, and are you anywhere else, Twitter, Instagram, or anything?
Nope.
No.
I just, and I really pulled back on the Facebook, and I probably made a mistake. I got a little political, and I took a little heat for that, and I'm not going to say that I was wrong, but I was probably wrong to make a statement like that on social media. But that's me, and that's what I did, and so I just sort of back off now. And occasionally, I'll put stuff on Facebook about something that Brian and I are going to do, or Bruce Springsteen doing this, and the University of Minnesota doing this football. So, I just sort of have laid off pretty good. And I think Facebook, has become just too all-encompassing, and they get so many people that, find some critical aspect to, the fact that they can actually say, well, you're this or you're that, or, and to me, I don't appreciate that. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stop doing it. So I'm happy, doing exactly what I'm doing and throwing in my 2 cents here and there.
That's great. It can be a pretty toxic place sometimes. You're absolutely right.
It can.
Yeah, as we learned in college, social media is for everybody. That's the good thing. We also learned that social media is for everything. That's the bad thing.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
What a wonderful interview. Jim, thank you for spending, we went over the hour that we told you we were going to kind of keep it to, but the stories that you've brought to us, we can't wait to share these with the Can Crusher Nation. We loved it. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, this was really awesome. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and good luck to you guys.
What a fun interview that was with Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. And it was a little different than Brian Blair's. Brunzell dealt a little bit of dirt, which just the right amount for the Can Crushers.
Just the right amount for the Can Crushers. And, yeah, to hear how much he was owed about those wrestling figures and stuff, that's unbelievable.
That is crazy. And he kind of, kicked the lid off of that whole thing, that it turns out there were a lot of other guys that were owed some money for their merchandise.
Yeah, we need to find those other guys.
Yeah, we do.
Talk to them.
Yeah. This is a great story. We got to dig deeper now.
We got to dig deeper into it. One thing is, I really want to dive into these comic books and Jim's book as well. I think they'd be really interesting reads. I really do.
I agree. Yeah, I love comic books. I'd be curious to see what Killer Bees comic book looks like.
Well, like a comic book.
Right, probably with the Killer Bees. That makes perfect sense, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, guys, thank you once again to the English professor for hooking up the Killer Bees to be on Can Crushers. If you know anybody or would like us to dive into, somebody else's pocket and say, hey, come on Can Crushers, pass our name along, or give us their name and we'll say, hey, come on, and we'll interview them, right? We love this.
Yeah, we absolutely love this.
This is our favorite part of the show.
Absolutely, without question. This is a dream come true, being able to talk to some of the stars we knew, that we watched as kids, and getting to know them a little better now.
Yeah, it really is. So, again, thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Brian. All right, let's wrap it up. Go ahead.
Remember, just because you're trash doesn't mean you can't do great things. It's called a garbage can, not a garbage cannot.
See you next week, guys.